country can now issue bonds and raise funds. All in all, good news. Now let's turn to China. They're facing a debt crisis on two fronts. One is external lending. Xi Jinping's Belt and Road project loans are reportedly soaring. And second is local government debt. Let's focus on external lending first. The Rhodium Group has analyzed China's BRI debt since the pandemic. Here's what they found. From 2017 to 2019, China renegotiated loans worth $17 billion. If you think that's a lot, think again. Because in the next 3 years, they renegotiated loans worth $76.8 billion. A sum total of 3 years. That's 2020, 21 and 2022. The reasons are obvious. The COVID-19 pandemic led to economic ruin. That was followed by higher inflation due to the Ukraine war. So many BRI countries could not repay, and the result, China had to renegotiate the loans. In some cases, even write it off completely. As a matter of fact, 2020 seems to have been the worst year because China renegotiated loans worth $48 billion. What do these numbers say? That Xi Jinping's grand plan is failing. He spent billions to gain influence around the world, but he's ended up bankrupting the global south. And here's the catch. The blowback won't be limited to the borrowers alone. China too will feel the heat. On paper, they have the biggest pile of foreign exchange reserves, close to $3.2 trillion in April. But a good chunk of that is tied up in loans. Plus, the recent trade data is worrisome. If you want to build your forex, you need to export more. You sell more, you get dollars in return. And that's not happening. China's exports grew at almost 15% in March, but that pace came down to 8.5% in April. The result, China's corporate and retail banks saw net outflows in the last quarter. They bled foreign exchange. Where does that leave the BRI? In a lot of trouble. If China doesn't have enough capital at home, how can they lend abroad? The numbers reflect this problem. By 2019, China was lending $100 billion every year under the BRI. Now, between 60 and 70 billions. So the project has certainly lost momentum. It's also lost participants. Italy was the only G7 member in the Belt and Road. But the new government is having a rethink. Their agreement with China expires in 2024. Reports say it won't be renewed. So that's the external debt problem. Now the internal one. The same group, Rhodium, has done a study, and here's what they found. Half of China's cities have trouble servicing their debt. Now, debt service is pretty simple. It covers payments you have to make on loans, like interest payments. Half of China's cities are finding it hard to do that. The debt service cost is more than 10% of their income. Let me simplify that for you. Assume your income is $100, but you also have a loan. Every month you must pay $10 as interest. So what's your debt service cost? $10 out of 100, which is 10%. Experts say that's too high for local governments. But the question is, how did this happen? Chinese cities have seen lower income for two reasons. One is the pandemic restrictions. Zero COVID was a nightmare for China's economy. The second was the property crisis. Remember the whole Evergrande fiasco? That led to lower tax and land sale revenue. So China has two options now. It can either generate more revenue to service the debt, or it must restructure. The first one will be hard to do. China's investment and manufacturing data is not encouraging. Their pre-pandemic GDP growth was around 7%, and now just around 5%. No GDP growth, no income. And no income means no debt payments. That's the trouble for China. Their lending was pinned on the idea of never-ending prosperity. Xi Jinping could not conceive of a slowdown in China. But that's exactly what's happened. And he's now facing a ticking debt bomb. Let's talk about BRICS. It's gearing up to challenge a West-led world order. And India is at the forefront of this conversation. Listen in to what Jaishankar said.
Our gathering must send out a strong message that the world is multipolar, that it is rebalancing, and that old ways cannot address new situations. We are a symbol of change and must act accordingly.
Multipolarity, economic freedom, and a fair and just world order. India is defending these principles at BRICS. You know what BRICS is? It's a group of 5 countries: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. BRICS foreign ministers met in South Africa. And later this year, the leaders will meet for a summit. And that will happen in August. But BRICS is setting the tone right now. They're joining forces and making bold moves. They're calling for a rebalancing of world order. They're talking about expansion. They're even considering a common currency. What's driving these ambitious plans? Let's find out. Now, the BRICS foreign ministers meet is a regular affair. But this year, the meeting has greater significance. BRICS is considering 2 proposals. Number 1, the expansion of BRICS, and number 2, the pitch for a common currency. There's progress on both fronts. Let me tell you one by one. First, let's talk about expansion. The queue to join BRICS is getting longer. Reports say 19 countries have shown interest. They want to become members of BRICS. We do not have a proper list or a formal document that gives names of all these interested parties. But since last year, several names have been doing the rounds. There are Latin American countries, African nations, even countries from West Asia and Asia are now showing interest. In fact, Saudi Arabia, Iran and the UAE have made formal requests to join. So there's clear consensus on expansion. But a final call is yet to be taken. Of course, it will come up for discussion again in August when BRICS leaders eventually meet for their annual summit. So what are the next steps? BRICS countries will now come up with a formal document, one that will serve as a guide for expansion.
More work will need to be done on this matter. It is still to be processed, and once we have a document that we believe offers clear guidance, we will then take that to the summit in August.
So that's the way forward. The work has already begun. Behind the scenes, as many as 15 foreign ministers were invited to this week's meetings. This includes the 5 BRICS members and those nations who are interested in joining. So there's no doubt that the BRICS will expand. It's only a matter of time. China, too, is backing the idea.
I believe the enlargement of the BRICS will be beneficial to the BRICS countries, beneficial to developing countries, and to increase the representation influence of this mechanism.
So the expansion plan has stakers. The other proposal is of a common currency. Yes, a currency for BRICS. The idea was proposed last year by Russian President Vladimir Putin. You probably already know the reason why. Russia is under severe sanctions, so it needs an alternative. Other countries too feel the same need. They are looking for a replacement to the dollar. These countries have felt the impact of sanctions as well. There are more problems like rising energy prices and the increasing value of dollar. They have intensified the anti-dollar sentiment. So can BRICS offer an alternative? Not yet, but they are looking for guidance. The matter has been referred to the BRICS Bank, the new development bank. It is the group's very own banking institution. BRICS members have asked how a potential currency might work and if using it might lead to any sanctions. The feasibility of a common currency is being studied.
We had one of the senior executives of the new development bank briefing our meeting on work that the bank has been doing, looking at the potential use of alternative currencies to the current internationally traded currencies, and looking at how we strengthen the arm of the BRICS Development Bank, and also ensure that we do not become victim to sanctions.
So going by what the South African foreign minister has to say, the possibility is still being explored. We'll have to see how this pans out. It will be interesting to see how BRICS shapes its strategy in the coming months. For now, they're sending a clear message. BRICS wants to become the voice of the global South. It is trying to capitalize on the anti-West sentiment and gain ground. But execution will be tricky. 2 problems could cause complications. The first one is the war in Ukraine and the arrest warrant against Putin. The International Criminal Court, or ICC, issued it earlier this year. It has put the host, South Africa, in a tricky situation. South Africa is a member of the ICC. If Putin attends this summit in August, there's a risk he might be arrested. Putin is yet to confirm his plans. The South African government is trying to find a way around. Recently, it decided to award immunity to all summit attendees. But there are doubts if this measure will be good enough. The outcome of this affair could affect the future of BRICS. Another challenge are the frosty ties between India and China. They could cast their shadow too. Would India like to join a common currency pool with China, keeping in mind the tensions at the border? What we do know is that New Delhi is trying to shield multipolarity through BRICS. The challenge will be to protect Indian interests as the BRICS tries to carve out a new identity for itself.
Is NATO coming to Asia? It's a question that many countries in the region are asking. Some say NATO is already here. They have partners in the Indo-Pacific. They're also opening an office in Japan. But what does NATO's Asian pivot mean? China is clearly unhappy about it. The defense minister made that clear at the Shangri-La Dialogue. It's an annual security conference held in Singapore, like we just told you. All major powers attended. China's defense minister lashed out at NATO's Asian pivot. He said all such alliances will plunge the region into chaos. Listen to this.
In essence, attempts to push for NATO-like alliances in the Asia-Pacific are a way of kidnapping regional countries and exaggerating conflicts and confrontations, which will only plunge the Asia-Pacific into a vortex of disputes and conflicts.
Which alliances is he talking about? You have security groupings like the AUKUS and the Five Eyes Alliance. You also have more dynamic ones like the Quad. China opposes all of them. It says this is an attempt to contain Beijing's influence. Just one problem, though. These alliances did not appear out of thin air. They are a direct response to Chinese expansionism. Look at the partner countries. India is a member of the Quad. Philippines recently held four-way talks with the US, Japan, and Australia. These are not Western countries. These are Asian nations, fed up with Chinese belligerence. A free and open Indo-Pacific is in their interests as well. The only question is how to achieve that. Should NATO be imported into Asia? There are indications of such an attempt, not to recruit Asian members, but to create a wider community. And India figures prominently in that plan. US Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin is in New Delhi. His visit comes weeks ahead of Prime Minister Modi's US trip. He's already met Defense Minister Rajnath Singh. Security cooperation topped the agenda. Talks are on to share fighter jet engine technology with India. New Delhi is also planning to buy 30 drones from the US. The deal is worth around $3 billion. It is consistent with India's long-term defense policy. Diversify purchases, build up local capabilities. But the US has something even bigger in mind. This is NATO Plus. Now, some quick facts. NATO Plus is an extended community of NATO. Right now, there are 5 members: Japan, South Korea, Australia, Israel, and New Zealand. How is this different from NATO? For starters, these countries are not Atlantic. They're Indo-Pacific and West Asian. But more importantly, there is no Article 5. Article 5 is the rule of collective defense. It does not apply to NATO Plus. And it's honestly a raw deal. You get all the responsibilities, but none of the protection. Then why bother joining it? NATO Plus offers easy intelligence sharing. It will also make military procurement easier. Say you want an American F-16 or an F-22. If you're part of NATO Plus, you could get a good deal. A US House panel wants India to be included in this setup, in NATO Plus. It's a panel that deals with China. It has the support of both Democrats and Republicans. But how should India see this offer? With a lot of apprehension. NATO Plus may not be a treaty alliance, but it's a clear sign of picking sides. If India joins NATO Plus, it would limit New Delhi's strategic autonomy. No more warm ties with Russia. Definitely no defense trade. Plus, India's relationship with the US is very different from other NATO Plus members. Australia and New Zealand fought 2 world wars on America's side. Japan and South Korea are treaty allies. Israel and the US share a special relationship, but India-US ties are very different from all of these. These warm exchanges are a recent phenomenon. Washington spent most of the last 70 years criticizing and sanctioning India, so New Delhi must be wary. It cannot become a pawn for NATO's new rivalry with China. The alliance is famous for its use and throw tactics. So the China challenge must be met on India's terms, which means no to alliance and yes to engagement. Even the US seems to be testing the waters right now. This NATO Plus idea was proposed by a US panel. It has not been officially offered by the US government. Seems like Washington was sending out feelers, trying to see what the reaction will be. So far, it's been tepid. NATO Plus comes with a lot of baggage, commitments, and demands. India would do well to steer clear. Now let's talk about Russia. It is facing a new problem. The ruble is falling. The Russian currency has sunk to new lows. Today, it breached the 100 mark. What does that mean? It means you can exchange $1 for 100 rubles. This is a 17-month low, and this has been a trend of late. 2023 is not going well for the Russian currency. Since January, it has lost 40% of its value. The 100 mark is a psychological one. The ruble breached it today. Do you know when was the last time this happened? In March last year. That's when the ruble dropped to 136 against the dollar. This happened right after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. But by June last year, the ruble had recovered. It was trading at 50. The recovery was thanks to high prices of oil and gas. The fall in March was a knee-jerk reaction, a consequence of Russia's decision to attack Ukraine. So what is happening now? Why is the ruble falling again? Because exports from Russia are falling. I have some numbers from the month of April. The value of Russian exports fell by 35% in that month, in April. And why are exports falling? Because Russia's oil and gas revenues have declined. In July last year, Russia earned over $16 billion from the sale of oil and gas. This was last year, July. 1 year later, this earning has fallen to less than $7 billion. Now, oil and gas is Russia's main export. So when its value falls, less money goes into Moscow's coffers. And that in turn puts pressure on the currency. But things may improve soon because remember, Russia's economy is not slowing because of sanctions. Instead, it is adapting. It is also growing. As per the latest data, the GDP expanded by 4.9%. This is for the second quarter of 2023. And why is this significant? Because so far, the Russian economy had been shrinking. In the last 4 quarters, there was a contraction, mostly because of Western sanctions. There has been immense pressure. Moscow has shown remarkable resilience. If the present trend continues, Russia's GDP would be back to pre-war levels. The conflict has frozen, but the economy has not. Industrial production is up in Russia. That's due to high levels of defense spending. It is helping Russia's economy. And this is not unheard of, by the way. In the past 2 wars have led to economic growth. Let me give you some examples, in fact. During World War II, America's GDP grew by more than 17%. This was in 1942. 17% growth. The Korean War also boosted the American economy. This was in 1951. The US grew by 11.4%. Then we had the Vietnam War. Again, the US economy grew rapidly. In 1966, its GDP peaked at 7.3%. What explains this paradoxical relationship between conflict and economic growth? There is a simple explanation. During war, there is unprecedented mobilization of natural resources. Factories ramp up production. There is investment in infrastructure. All this expansion creates jobs, and that fuels economic growth. But who foots the bill for this? It's usually the government. Leaders need resources to fight wars, so more budget is allocated towards defense, and that's exactly what's happening in Russia right now. Moscow has set a new defense spending target. It's a target of $100 billion. Earlier, the target for 2023 was $54 billion. So the new goal is almost double, perhaps because Russia has already spent the amount budgeted earlier. In the first 2 months of this year, Russia's defense bill was worth $26 billion. That's half of the original budget, $26 billion. And where is all this money going? Mostly to make weapons. The Russian army will get more military resources. Moscow has been boasting about this progress.
The Russian weapon-making industry not only quickly adapted to working under fierce sanctions pressure, but also its power grew many times over in some areas.
There is a message for Ukraine here. More weapons means Russia has no intention of slowing down. This war will continue. Moscow is looking for a clear outcome, not a stalemate that leads to a negotiation. That does not mean the sanctions are not hurting Russia. They are. They have curbed growth and options. But they failed to inflict the kind of pain that the West had hoped for.
And now let's talk about something else that always courts controversy. Amazon, the house of horrors brought to you by Jeff Bezos. The e-commerce giant's employees are angry once again. Workers descended upon the company's Seattle headquarters. They were up in arms yet again. So what were they angry about this time? A lot, actually. A diverse bunch of problems brought the workers out. First, there's Amazon's return to office mandate. The firm is being quite inflexible about it. It's causing a lot of resentment among the staff. Second, there's Amazon's recent firing spree. The company has laid off about 27,000 workers. The ones still left are not pleased. And third is climate change. Amazon recently backtracked on its climate commitments, and the employees are not taking it lying down. All these issues merged at the Seattle protest. Here's more. This is the Amazon headquarters in Seattle. And this is what was happening around it yesterday. The people you see are Amazon workers. They have decided to stage a walkout. And it was to send a message to the firm. Well, actually to send multiple messages. The workers are protesting a variety of issues. The first is the return of work from office.
As tech workers, we were told many times during the pandemic that we were doing our best work, that our productivity was high as it's ever been. We made so much money. And I'm not naive that the shift to remote work will take some adjustments within Amazon, but the benefits far outweigh those adjustments.
Today, we're here because a lot of Amazonians feel in their gut that something is not right with the company. And there are a lot of signs of this, such as a rigid, one-size-fits-all return-to-office mandate.
That's not the only issue, though. There's also Amazon's recent firing spree. The company has laid off about 27,000 workers in the last few months. It has also got people riled up. They're protesting the callous nature of the company. They're fighting back against the diktats from management.
So far, the options that seem to be given are do what you're told or quit. And that's why we're here. Because I'm not going to quit and I'm not going to do this.
Protests over both these issues are quite understandable. The work from office mandate and the rampant layoffs affect employees directly. But the Amazon Seattle protesters also have another cause. An even bigger, more holistic reason to march. They're protesting to protect the environment.
Amazon's carbon emissions have increased 40% since the climate pledge was first announced. And that's while severely undercounting and underreporting the emission numbers.
The climate pledge she's talking about refers to Amazon's promise to cut emissions. Amazon had earlier said it would make all shipments net zero for carbon emissions by 2030. That was always going to be tough. Remember, every Amazon delivery uses a lot of fossil fuels. Planes, trucks and vans move packages all over the world. That means the company has a massive carbon footprint. It will take a complete overhaul to change that. And Amazon is not willing to walk the talk. So instead, it has shifted the goalposts. It has vowed to deploy 100,000 electric delivery vehicles by 2030. It still plans to go carbon neutral eventually. But now the deadline is 2040. And as we've seen, this isn't set in stone. Amazon's employees aren't having it. any of it. Neither the climate catastrophe nor management's mandates.
I'm out here because I refuse to just sit idly by while mandates are dictated from above down that don't make sense and hurt the planet, hurt families and individual lives, and just to get us into a seat at the office for their tax incentives. I'm not here for it.
So looks like Amazon's bubble of troubles is only set to grow. Now, have you heard the saying, don't dig a hole for yourself? Well, guess who hasn't? China. Because Beijing is digging a hole. It's not just any other hole. It will be over 32,800 feet deep into the Earth's crust. China calls it a part of its exploration efforts. The drilling began in the Xinjiang region on Tuesday. But what is Beijing planning to find? Our next report tells you all about it.
China is drilling into the Earth's crust, digging a 32,808 feet hole. Once done, it'll be the country's deepest ever borehole. The drilling is happening in the Tarim Basin, located in China's oil-rich Xinjiang region. But why is Beijing digging such a deep hole? The answer is scientific exploration. China wants to study the areas of the planet, ones that lie deep below the Earth's surface. In 2021, Chinese President Xi Jinping talked about deep Earth exploration, pushing for advancement in this field. This expedition is a step towards that. Not just that, it will help China unearth rich minerals and even energy resources. On top of that, it could also help evaluate risks of disasters, like earthquakes or even volcanic eruptions. So, how exactly do you drill a hole this deep into the Earth? According to Chinese media, the drill has a design depth of 11,100 meters. That is over 36,000 feet. So it'll drill into the ground, penetrating over 10 continental strata, which is basically layers of rock. What the drilling aims to reach is the Cretaceous system, rocks that date back 145 million years. Now, the drilling process is not without its own challenges. There's a harsh environment on the ground. Once you go deeper, the conditions worsen. The further you go down, the higher the temperature gets. Sometimes it even gets too hot to go any further. But this isn't the first time this is being done. In fact, this isn't even the deepest hole that's being dug. That honor lies with Russia's Kola super deep borehole. That one was dug over a period of 20 years. The drilling process began around 1970. It reached a depth of 40,230 feet in 1989. But work on that borehole stopped in 1992. That's because temperatures touched 180 degrees Celsius. With the collapse of the Soviet Union, the project soon shut down 3 years later. Not just that, the United States and Germany too attempted to do the same. The US began Project Mohole in the early 1960s, but it was soon called off due to skyrocketing costs. Germany too attempted to pull off the impossible in 1990. Even that project was soon shut down. So, will China be successful where others have failed? Only time will tell.
Oh, Don, you're a little controversial. You're talking about illegal immigration. I said it's illegal.
That there are, for immigrants on the whole,
Come on, try getting it out. Try getting it out.
I'll get it out.
I mean, I don't know if you're going to put this on television, but you don't even know what you're talking about. Try getting it out. Go ahead.
The premiums are going through the roof. The deductibles, frankly, you have to get hit with a Komatsu tractor in order to use them. They're so high. We just spent $1 million building a soccer field, okay? A soccer field for our prisoners that happen to be in Guantanamo. Okay? I don't like that. What do you need $1 million for? Level out the surface. Let them play. The Iranians are great negotiators. The Persians are great negotiators. And we have people that are babies. It's like a chess player, grandmaster, playing against a checkers child. No, that's what it is. We give them, think of it, a nuclear scientist, and they won't give us our hostages back. It's so insane. President Obama, Secretary Kerry, I highly think you should read this book quickly. Quickly!
We have very stupid people in our country negotiating for us, and we have leaders that don't know what they're doing.
You know, Jeb Bush, one of my opponents, I noticed he's not doing very well in the polls. I've actually noticed. And by the way, they said I won the debate. Is that nice? Is that nice? Right? The polls came out and said I won. And the media, look at all those people back there. Scavengers. They're like scavengers.
They'll probably say the crowds were about equal. Oh, they were equal. But that's the way they are, very dishonest.
CNN is terrible. CNN. You're with CNN? Are you with CNN? You people do not cover us accurately at all. So they have a few protesters outside, and they have thousands of people, and the first question from CNN is about protesters.
So what I'm going to do is span out. Show them the crowd, press. Show them the crowd. Show them the crowd. Look, they're not turning the cameras. They don't even turn the cameras. They don't even turn the cameras because you know what? They're very dishonest people. Because you know what they do? They have the camera, live television, on my face the entire amount. My wife goes, I go home. Were there any people there tonight, darling? They don't see. They never show the crowds.
Frankly, I don't even think they give a damn about education, half of them. And I'm sure some maybe do. You use that word in this form. I will. Because people want to hear the truth, Frank. I watch you all the time. They want to hear the truth. Correct. We have to be able to express ourselves. But referring to people as rapists, referring to John McCain, a war hero, 5.5 years as a POW, and you call him a dummy. Is that appropriate in running for president? Okay, you got to let me speak, though, Frank, because you interrupt all the time, okay? So, no, I know him too well. That's the problem.
In the center of the stage tonight, businessman Donald Trump.
I would never give up my microphone. I thought that was disgusting. That showed such weakness. The way he was taken away by two young women. The microphone, they just took the whole place over. That will never happen with me. I don't know if I'll do the fighting myself or if other people will. But that was a disgrace. The way I felt badly for him. But it showed that he's weak. You want to be what, vice president? Oh, now his question's no longer as good. He had great credibility until he said that. Now it's like, where did he come from? We need a leader that wrote The Art of the Deal.
I said trade deals. Who would do better? I'll tell you what. I know the greatest negotiators in the world. Some are horrible people, horrible human beings. Who cares? Some Wall Street guys, they're brutal, they're miserable. You wouldn't want to go out to dinner. They're terrible people. I love them. You know who's our primary representative right now? Carolyn Kennedy. You know how she got the job? 60 Minutes. She went to the White House. She said, I'd love to have a job. I have nothing to do. They said, how would you like to be the ambassador to Japan? She goes, really?
Artificial intelligence, or AI. 3 decades ago, it made movies like Matrix a blockbuster. But today, AI is everywhere. In the last few months, ChatGPT has taken the world by storm. What's ChatGPT? An artificial intelligence chatbot. One that can write essays, make up poems, scripts of complete movies, and even clear exams. In fact, it's gotten so out of hand that the creator of ChatGPT, Sam Altman, wants us to regulate it.
We think that regulatory intervention by governments will be critical to mitigate the risks of increasingly powerful models.
So how powerful is AI? How can we control it? Or can we control it? Also, why should we care? Hello and welcome. I'm Palki Sharma. And on this show, we'll try to read between the lines, the stated and the unstated, the obvious and the hidden, to bring you the full story. You may hear AI and think ChatGPT, but that's not the only AI in your lives. In fact, AI is all around us. Using Google Maps, that's AI. Talking to Siri or Alexa, that's AI too. Using predictive text, AI again. Using Face ID to unlock your phones, that too is AI. The YouTube algorithm that is making this video pop up on your feeds is also artificial intelligence. Like I said, it's everywhere. So what exactly is artificial intelligence? Well, the answer involves a lot of jargon, so let me try and break it down. What makes us humans special? It's our ability to think. And that's exactly what AI is trying to replicate. Systems that think and solve problems like we humans do. Basically intelligence, but artificial. The idea is simple: to recreate human-like thinking to solve problems. Which brings us to another term, machine learning. Essentially machines learning from experience. Algorithms learn from previous data. They recognize existing patterns and use them to solve problems with no human interference. I know it sounds complicated, so let me try and simplify this further. Imagine you're scrolling down your YouTube feed. You see a video about dogs. You like it. The algorithm takes note of it. Suddenly, dog videos are all over your feed. So what the algorithm has done is this. It used machine learning to understand what you like and started recommending similar content. Now, AI has come a long way. Computers beating humans at chess is ancient history. Today, AI is broadly characterized into three categories. First, artificial narrow intelligence, where the system is given one task and it does just that. Think appliances, self-driving cars, streaming apps, or even healthcare. This is simple. We basically give a machine a task and they do it. So the rudimentary stages of artificial intelligence, that's what it is. Then comes the second stage, artificial general intelligence. This is where AI can rival humans. They can do multiple things at the same time. Many call ChatGPT a step towards artificial general intelligence. Then we have the third stage. And this is where things get a little scary. It is called artificial superintelligence. Basically, machines going beyond human intelligence. They have a mind of their own. Remember all those sci-fi movies with the villain robot? This is that stage, or so we are told. But we are not talking Terminator yet. The current emergence of AI has raised a lot of questions. Is it ethical? Can it go out of hand? And are we too late to control this? In March this year, some of tech's most prominent minds wrote a letter. It included the likes of Twitter CEO Elon Musk and Apple co-founder Steve Wozniak. They asked world leaders to hit pause, to stop AI development for 6 months. Let me read out a part from that letter. This is what it says. Powerful AI systems should be developed only once we are confident that their effects will be positive and their risks will be manageable. So clearly, top tech leaders are worried. They believe AI is going too fast, fast enough to have negative impacts on society and humanity. Inherently, AI is not without its own set of problems. The first would be the way it's used. Facial recognition to open your phone sounds great, but what happens when the same is used to spy on you? Countries use it to spy on their citizens. Some even use it for racial profiling, like China does. They use surveillance to oppress Uyghur Muslims. The other problem is bias. You would expect machines to be neutral, right? But at the end of the day, they're made by us. And as humans, we are inherently biased. So the machines we make are biased too. In fact, AI almost amplifies the existing biases in society. AI is as good as the data that it is fed. If the data is biased, so will be the machine. Imagine this. an AI algorithm is trained on data involving only white men. Now, when this same algorithm is applied to women, the result will obviously be a biased one. Which brings us to the third issue, and that is lethal mistakes. Humans make mistakes, and so do machines. But what happens when the mistake is life-threatening? What happens when a self-driving car kills someone? Who will you blame? The car or the person behind the code? And what if the stakes are a little higher? I'm talking about lethal autonomous weapons, aka killer robots. These will be able to identify targets and kill them without any human help. We're not there yet, but precursors do exist. Think armed drones. In 2020, these may have killed a human for the first time. The details are a little murky. According to the United Nations, a Turkish-made Kargu-2 drone hunted down members of Libya's national army. The manufacturer says Kargu-2 can use machine learning to classify objects. This allows it to autonomously fire. Now, Turkey denies using Kargu-2 in this way. But the point is, the drone does have a mind of its own, just like a lot of other armed drones. So the United Nations wants to ban killer robots, but countries are not agreeing. The US, for example, wants guidelines and not a complete ban. So we can't regulate killer robots yet. But can we regulate AI? That's what OpenAI's Sam Altman called for at the US Congress. He says AI could cause significant harm to the world, so the need of the hour is regulation. And leading the trend is China. They have come up with a law that seeks to regulate AI in all forms. Chinese tech companies will need to register their AI products. They will go through a security assessment first. What do we make of it? Well, China is always ready to regulate everything, even human rights. But what about the West? The European Union too is working on an AI Act. It's called the European AI Act, the first law for AI systems in the West. The regulation takes a risk-based approach. What does that mean? It means the higher the risk, the stricter the regulation. Now, this act could be a precedent for others, especially the United States. India, too, is considering a regulatory framework for AI. But you see, all governments are just playing catch-up. AI is moving at breakneck speed, and countries will have to race much harder to control it. In fact, they may be late already, like they were with social media. They thought of regulation only after things went out of control, and just like social media, AI too can be a double-edged sword. It can be used for both good and bad. So we must not repeat the same mistakes that we did with social media. The regulations must come before the damage is done. Now let's turn our focus to Kenya, like Chinese hackers seem to be doing. A new report says that Kenya's government data is under attack. Chinese hackers are trying to gather government secrets, especially information related to loan repayments. That's right, loan repayments. If that seems odd, you must remember that Kenya is heavily indebted to China. In 2021, they owed Beijing over $7 billion. It has come down a bit since then, but China is still Kenya's biggest bilateral lender. Also a textbook example of China's debt trap diplomacy. And Kenya is learning it the hard way. The last few years have been punishing. First, it was the Wuhan virus pandemic. Then a war began in Ukraine, and all of this affected the global economy. Those shocks have hit the repayment capacity of indebted nations, nations like Kenya. But China is a loan shark. It can be unforgiving and inflexible when it comes to debt. It refuses to take haircuts. In some cases, it defers payments, but doesn't really forgive them. It delays loan restructuring. It also wants to jump the queue and recover its money first. And now it seems that China has been resorting to espionage to secure its debt. Here's what this report says. Chinese hackers have been targeting Kenya since 2019. And who specifically are they targeting? The Office of the President, the Finance Ministry, the Foreign Ministry, the Defense, Information, Health, Land and Interior Ministries of Kenya, even Kenya's Counter-Terrorism Center. All of them have been a target. It's been a long campaign. It targeted almost every major Kenyan institution. Over the years, Chinese hackers have stolen information from every corner. What for? to figure out Kenya's debt repayment plans, to see how likely it was for Kenya to default. Because that is a major concern. Even though Kenya is one of the more stable East African economies, the Chinese debt burden is significant. This fiscal year, Kenya spent almost $800 million in Chinese debt repayment. That's a 50% increase since last year. It's one of the government's largest expenses, repaying Chinese debt. Most of the money was paid to the Export-Import Bank of China and China Development Bank, and both of these are state-controlled. Which brings us to the next point. Why are Chinese hackers looking at debt owed to the Chinese government? Are they some especially patriotic hackers? Or are they also controlled by the government? The report suggests the latter, that these hackers are controlled by Beijing. They're part of a group unofficially called backdoor diplomacy. And they're seen as an arm of the Chinese state. Their name is a giveaway, backdoor diplomacy. They hack targets to further Beijing's diplomatic goals. And the report we're talking about is based on data from 2 cybersecurity firms based in Slovakia and the US. Now here's something else that you should know. China using hackers to target countries is not news. But their usual targets are in Asia and the West, not in Africa. In that sense, the Kenya hacking is noteworthy. It shows how China can go to any lengths to get its money. Of course, Beijing denies all these charges. A government spokesperson has said, and I'm quoting, China is against irresponsible moves that use topics like cybersecurity to sow discord in the relations between China and other developing countries. China is a main victim of cyber theft and attacks and a staunch defender of cybersecurity. And what is Kenya's response? Well, they say this is not a first. Kenya's presidential office has said that they face, quote-unquote, frequent infiltration attempts from Chinese, American and European hackers. The tone and the substance of Kenya's response suggests that it is trying to downplay this hacking scandal. But then again, they owe billions to Beijing. Not kicking up a fuss and focusing on their cyber defenses would be a better strategy at this point. You know what was the biggest diplomatic event this month? The Quad Summit in Australia. It was scheduled for next week. Now it's been cancelled. Why? Thanks to US President Joe Biden. He's called off his visit to Australia, so the summit stands cancelled. And why won't he go? Because his own house is on fire. The Republicans are holding him hostage. The US government is running out of money. It needs cash, but the US Congress is not signing any checks. Biden has 2 weeks to fix this. Else there could be a government shutdown and a debt default, which will be a first in American history. So this is an emergency, and the Quad Summit will have to wait. And this episode has once again demonstrated the perils of American hegemony. A couple of their banks fail, and the global banking sector loses money. Their politicians cannot agree on a debt ceiling, and the Quad Summit gets cancelled. The Quad, as you would know, is a strategic grouping. It has 4 members, Australia, India, Japan and the United States. Leaders of all these 4 countries were supposed to meet in Sydney, Australia next week. This would have been their 3rd such meeting. Until 24 hours back, everything was on track. Then suddenly, Biden decided to skip Australia. He called his host, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. He said he won't be able to make it because he must resolve the debt crisis first. Australia found itself in a fix. It wanted to keep the summit alive, so it proposed a solution. If Biden cannot come, perhaps his representative could, someone like US Secretary of State Antony Blinken perhaps. But it did not work. Reports say soon after Biden's decision, Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida also pulled out. So Albanese just called off the summit.
The Quad leaders meeting will not be going ahead in Sydney next week. We, though, will be having that discussion between Quad leaders in Japan. I thank Prime Minister Kishida for his invitation for me to attend the G7, and it is appropriate that we talk.
Quick side note. Albanese attended the last Quad summit in Japan within hours of taking oath as Prime Minister. He did not want to miss it. But President Biden won't be able to fly to Australia, so the summit won't happen. Instead, the leaders will sit down in Japan for a chat. Japan is hosting the G7 summit this week. All 4 Quad leaders will be present. so they'll meet on the sidelines. Prime Minister Modi of India will be present. He'll also go to Australia, irrespective of Biden's plans. In Sydney, Prime Minister Modi is expected to address the Indian community, but no Quad meeting. And it's not the only casualty of Biden's decision. He's also called off his trip to Papua New Guinea. This was supposed to happen on Monday, and there were grand plans for it. Biden would have been treated like royalty. Reports say the government there had decided to shut down the country's airspace and declare the day a public holiday, also close key roads and have dancing groups greet Biden's motorcade. It was a grand plan. Why was he going, though? To meet leaders of the Pacific Islands. Prime Minister Modi is going there too. They're all making an outreach to the Pacific. They've ignored the region for a long time. China has benefited from it. It has stepped in to fill the vacuum. Now Washington wants to regain its turf, and Biden's visit would have helped. Consider what an expert in Australia said about this, and I'm quoting, "The mantra in the region is all about turning up. Turning up is half the battle. China turns up all the time, and so the optics aren't great." That's right, the optics are not great. American domestic politics has bulldozed the Quad summit. The China policy can wait, the allies can wait, the Pacific nations can wait. American politicians cannot. That's the message going out. And there's no progress with the budget negotiations. Biden met with the Republicans, no deal yet, although both sides sound more positive now.
Look, it was a good and productive meeting. Everyone agreed that default would be the worst outcome, a horrible situation for America and America's families. But we also agreed that we need to pass a bipartisan bill with bipartisan support in both chambers.
I think we set the stage to carry on further conversations. The president agreed to appoint a couple people from his administration to sit down and negotiate directly with my team, so I found that to be productive personally.
So they promise a deal, but can't say when. The world, meanwhile, is on the edge. A U.S. default would spell disaster. The White House released a statement yesterday. It said, and I'm quoting, "President Biden will return to the United States on Sunday following the completion of the G7 summit in order to be back for meetings with congressional leaders to ensure that Congress takes action by the deadline to avert default." So until Biden gets the money to run his government, world affairs will have to take a back seat. And this has become a hallmark of American diplomacy now. This breach of trust, lack of dependability, lack of policy continuity. President Trump did it with the Paris climate deal and the Iran nuclear deal. He walked out of both of them. The world suffered the consequences. Then Biden came to power. He rejoined the Paris Accord. He promised to revive the Iran deal. Virtually no progress. The point is, in a democracy, governments change. And governments spar with the opposition on policy issues all the time. But they also honor their international commitments. They don't hold the world hostage to their domestic political exigencies. When Biden came to power, he said America is back. Well, he was right. It's back to riding roughshod over the world.
They say storms always pass. That may be true, but only as long as you're not living on Jupiter. This planet is known for its constant storms and sheer size. It is our solar system's largest planet. Jupiter is so huge, it can fit over 1,300 Earths inside it. It is the fifth planet from the Sun and one of the brightest objects in the sky. But with that, it also makes science seem a bit dull sometimes, because so far, no one has been able to fully understand this planet. It's a big cosmic conundrum and a colorful one. Why do we say so? Because Jupiter keeps changing its colors and no one could understand why. Well, until now. Scientists have finally discovered why Jupiter's colors keep changing. Our next report tells you all about it.
This is Jupiter, the biggest planet in our solar system, just doing its own thing in space. But as relaxed as it seems, it can be quite temperamental. Mostly because it's so gassy all the time. This doesn't have much to do with what Jupiter had for dinner. Its moods are ever changing. But one thing is constant. Jupiter is always stormy. It has a very thick atmosphere and really strong winds which create complex weather patterns. And Jupiter's clouds are constantly pushed around because of this ever-present storm. But these clouds don't work like they do on Earth. They form bands which swirl around. And from where we see Jupiter, these bands look like stripes. Like in these visuals you see, it almost seems like this planet has stripes, which is made of different colors. But here's the catch, and this is where Jupiter's temperamental behavior comes in. This planet's stripes aren't constant. They not only move around a lot, along with the moving clouds, but they also change color. Now, that's where the real trust issues begin. Why, you ask? Because you never know which color Jupiter decides to wear on a given day. Sometimes it seems to be donned in pastels. Other times, the color palette looks dark and almost angry. And these colors change every 4 to 5 years. But as interesting as this so-called outfit change is, it is also one of science's greatest mysteries. For the longest time, scientists didn't know what made Jupiter change its colors, but now we have an answer. Thanks to the astronauts from the University of Leeds, they have published new research. It is based on information from NASA, whose spacecraft has been orbiting Jupiter for about 7 years now. So why does Jupiter change its colors? It has a lot to do with the planet's magnetic field, which is extremely intense, about 20,000 times stronger than Earth's. Every few years, there are changes in Jupiter's field, and these changes happen deep inside the planet, about 50 kilometers below the gas giant's surface, the result of which is seen on the planet's surface. Think of it as a churning on the planet. This affects Jupiter's weather. Sometimes it takes quite personally, considering its constant storms. So, as this weather goes a little crazy, causing the color of stripes to change, there are still many unanswered questions. But this advance is surely a leap forward. Hopefully, research will better our understanding about Jupiter and its ever-fluctuating moods.
And now let's talk about the US banking crisis. It's not over. On Monday, we told you about First Republic Bank. It's been sold to JP Morgan. And this has triggered new fears. Banking stocks in the US are down. Investors are worried. They fear that more banks are on the brink, that more banks could fail. But what's the basis of this? What is driving these concerns? That's what we'll discuss tonight, starting with the latest. Bank stocks took a beating on Tuesday. These were mostly mid-sized banks. What are mid-sized banks? Those with assets of $15 to $115 billion. It's a big range. These are typically banks that start as hometown banks, catering to a specific town or community. As they grow, they expand to nearby regions, usually by delivering highly personalized services. These are mid-sized banks, and they took a beating yesterday. Topping the list is a Los Angeles-based bank called PacWest. Stocks fell by more than 27%. Then we have a bank called Western Alliance. It lost 15% of its stock value. Third on the list is KeyCorp, down by 9%. A bank called Comerica shed 12%. Synovus Financial Corp lost 7%. These numbers translate into billions of dollars. And this trend is concerning. The question is, what is driving it? On first impressions, this seems to be a reaction to First Republic's takeover. We talked about this on Monday. First Republic has been sold to JP Morgan. It's the third bank to fail in this crisis, also the second largest bank failure in US history. Earlier, 11 banks tried to rescue First Republic. They injected $30 billion to avoid the collapse, but they couldn't save the bank. So the regulator stepped in, and the bank had to be sold. First Republic, too, was a mid-sized lender, the kind of banks we talked about earlier. And its collapse has left investors worried. They fear other banks will meet the same fate. The question is this an overreaction or a legitimate concern? Now, if you follow stocks, you'd know that they mostly react to sentiment. So it could just be that, a sharp reaction to a bank collapsing. But here's something that we cannot ignore. The vulnerabilities in the US economy, the collapsing banks have exposed them. And they could put pressure on other banks. Now, what are these vulnerabilities? First is commercial real estate. Valuation of commercial property has fallen drastically in the US. Prices are down by 20 to 25%. For office spaces, the decline is steeper. It's a fall of 30%. Now, how does this impact banks? Well, they fund the acquisition of such properties. A large part of their lending is for commercial real estate. The buyers take out loans, they buy property on mortgage, and they owe money to banks. Now there are signs of stress. Buyers are not being able to keep up with mortgages. In February, a leading property trust defaulted. Do you know what was the value of their debt? More than $1.7 billion. Last month, there was another high-profile default. It was of $161 million. So clearly, commercial loans are under pressure. And that's one problem. Here's another. Banks are sitting on a pile of unrealized losses. What are unrealized losses? And how did banks end up with such losses? This is basically about a bank's book of assets. So you buy something for $100. Then the price of that asset falls to $80. You haven't sold it yet. But if you sell it, you'll incur a loss of $20. That's your unrealized loss. It's a potential loss. It means you're holding a loss-making asset. Whenever you sell it, you'll make a loss. Hence the term unrealized loss. American banks have a lot of these losses. Going by one estimate, $620 billion, meaning U.S. banks are sitting on a $620 billion pile of unrealized losses. Sounds like a huge sum, but it could be worse. Because some experts say this is a conservative estimate and the actual number could be much higher. And these are the vulnerabilities that worry investors, the fear of more bad debts and the unrealized losses. You see, banking works like a pack of dominoes. If one piece falls, the others will most certainly follow. That's what we call a domino effect. And the U.S. banking sector is staring at this possibility. Let me show you more numbers. Over 2,000 American banks are looking at losses. Their liabilities are bigger than their assets. The value of their loan portfolios has fallen dramatically. And when I say dramatically, I mean something to the tune of $2 trillion. These are the blind spots of the U.S. banking system. Unless the regulators move fast, they will end up with a train crash. And it's not something that the world can afford.
For example, as Attorney General of California, I took on one of our country's largest for-profit colleges that scammed students. Well, Donald Trump ran a for-profit college that scammed students. Remember that. As a prosecutor, I specialized in cases of sexual abuse. Well, Donald Trump was found liable for committing sexual abuse. As Attorney General, I held Wall Street banks accountable for fraud. Well, Donald Trump was just found guilty of fraud, 34 counts. All of this is to say, in this campaign, I will proudly put my record against his every day of the week. Every day of the week.
A burglary was reported over the weekend at a Virginia campaign office for former President Donald Trump, and authorities are investigating whether anything was stolen. It happened Sunday at an office in Ashburn being leased by the Trump for President 2024 campaign that also serves as the headquarters of the Virginia 10th District Republican Committee, according to a news release from Northern Virginia's Loudoun County Sheriff's Office. The Sheriff's Office was contacted around 9 p.m. Sunday. The office said it has surveillance video that shows someone wearing dark clothing with a dark cap and carrying a backpack. An investigation continues. The video shows a person breaking in and going through the office. Sheriff's Office spokesperson Thomas A. Julia said in an email Tuesday, officials expect to issue an update once more is known. Julia said, it is rare to have the office of any political campaign or party broken into. Sheriff Mike Chapman said in a statement, we are determined to identify the suspect, investigate why it happened, and determine what may have been taken, as well as what may have been left behind. The Trump campaign and 10th District Republican Committee did not immediately respond to emails seeking comment. Americans, The 2024 election is just around the corner, and we want to hear from you. If it comes down to Kamala Harris versus Donald Trump, who gets your vote? Type Kamala or Trump in the comments. This election is crucial, and your vote could make all the difference. What matters most to you in this election? Is it the economy, health care, or foreign policy? Share with us why you're standing by your candidate. We want to know your reasons, and let's keep the conversation open and respectful. What do you think are the most pressing issues that need to be addressed by the next president? Is it climate change, education, or something else entirely? Share your thoughts. And if you could ask one question to the candidates, what would it be? Let's see what issues matter most to our community. Don't forget to smash that follow button for more election updates and spirited debates. Use the hashtags DIRKELECTION2024 and Kamala vs. Trump to join the conversation. Let's amplify our voices together. Share this video and let's make it go viral up to Election Day. Let's see where the public stands.
I'm the first president in 71 years that didn't start a war. And when Hillary Clinton was running against me, she said, if you look at him and if you hear him, he's going to get us into wars. I said, no, I'm going to keep you out of wars. 3 years ago, we had no problems. We had no inflation. We had no Ukraine problem. We had no Israel problem. We had no problems, literally, whatsoever. We had a border that was secure, the most secure it's ever been. The United States economy was the strongest it's ever been. We did some job. And now everything is horrible. We're going to end up in a world war. We have an incompetent leader of the United States. He can't walk off a stage. He can't find the stairs. He can't put two sentences together. And this man is dealing with Putin and President Xi, and the biggest threat is nuclear weapons. And we have a man that doesn't even know what a nuclear weapon is as our chief negotiator. And it's a very scary thing. He could end up in World War III.